Welcome to IRP's Thursday Seminar Series. We're delighted to have with us remotely Maggie Jones, who's a senior economist at the Census Bureau. She's going to be sharing some of her work with us on the EITC and intergenerational mobility. And we're delighted she was actually scheduled to be with us last spring, early on during the pandemic. And so I'm glad we're able to get her back on our schedule and hear about her important work. As is always the case on the Thursday seminars, those of you that are listening in can't ask questions directly. I'd ask that you post your questions in the chat function. Make sure to send it to both attendees and panelists. And then she, as true to Economist form, has asked that I go ahead and interrupt her and ask those questions. So again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll hand it over to Maggie. Thank you very much, Maggie. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to share my research here. This is joint work with Randy Aki and Amelia Simianova. We have a few projects underway together, and this is one of them. And I would like to make sure that I say the disclaimer here. I would like to say that any opinions and conclusions expressed by me today are those of myself and possibly my co-authors, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Census Bureau. To start off, I'd like to spend a little bit of time motivating this question. I think that the research that I'm going to talk about today, and that we're hopefully going to extend a little bit, is part of a either new or renewed focus on some large government programs and their impact on the long-run outcomes of children who are affected by them in childhood. So just a couple of days ago, Hilary Hoynes presented her work at the Census Bureau on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and some effects that she and her co-authors are seeing in terms of children's outcomes in later life. Based on the rollout of SNAP at the county level in the initial years of the program. So the EITC is a very important policy to look at in this framework. It's a longstanding feature of the tax and transfer system. It's been around since 1975. At that time, it started off as a small subsidy that went to filers with children, and it represented 10% of an earner's paycheck back in a tax refund, up to a fairly modest threshold when it would phase out. And the whole point of the program was to compensate low-wage workers for the regressivity of the payroll tax system. And so not just payroll taxes, but also sales taxes, excise taxes, any of the other taxes that are sort of outside of the income tax system tend to fall more heavily on low-wage workers as a proportion of their wage compared with high-wage earners. Payroll taxes being particularly an issue in this case. And so in the period that we study, the EITC was considerably expanded. And it was part of a package of policies surrounding welfare reform and sort of this transfer of focus from out of work to in work subsidies. So changing the nature of the social safety net to support workers as opposed to people who are out of work. The effects of this sort of change in focus from out of work to in work benefits has not had the kind of attention that other aspects of the EITC have had. So we know that the EITC is widely studied for its labor force impacts. The fact that the sort of target population, these former welfare users, low-wage workers who are single mothers, entered the labor force due to the EITC in a partial sense But we don't really have a good assessment of the long-term impact on children from this change of having their mothers at home, having them subsidized essentially by the welfare system, and then having the EITC be the thing that compensates them for returning to work. The work that has been done has found that there are net positive effects over some short-term outcomes, such as test scores and early life labor force participation. But the retrospective data that we need to really make an assessment of the long-term impacts on children and how they're situated in adulthood has only recently become available through some work that we've done at the Census Bureau on intergenerational mobility. And so we're attempting to perform the first examination of how intergenerational transmission of income is moderated by EITC eligibility. I'm going to focus on the term eligibility here and make it clear that we are going to estimate an intent to treat effect. So we are going to be using the exogenous changes to the EITC policy between 1991 and 1996, and actually before and after as well, because there were changes that occurred in the late 1980s. And we're going to be using these exogenous policy changes to estimate this intent to treat effect, where eligibility is only determined by the family structure that a child grows up in. So the number of siblings that you have and the year that you were born, essentially, and the year that your siblings were born. And our goal is to fit this intervention within a wider and growing literature on the impacts of increased family resources on later life outcomes. That being said, our work is, of course, related to literature on the impacts of EITC on children. And I've listed some of the papers here. I should point out the Bastian and Mitchell-Moore paper from 2018. We are using a very similar empirical strategy where they also use sort of like lifetime value of potential lifetime EITC. And they find that EITC generosity between the ages of 12 and 18 increases children's educational attainment and employment in fairly early life. Their work uses the PSID, so it's a much smaller sample, and we do have the benefit of being able to look at individual ages of treatment as opposed to grouped ages, the way that this paper looks at the effect. So that's because of the nature of our data. And our work is also related to recent literature on socioeconomic or intergenerational mobility by race. We're going to be able to break out the things that we look at by white and black, following the work in Chetty et al., of which one I'm one of the et al. In there. And the data that we're going to be using is more or less the same as the data used in that work. We are going to be looking at slightly younger children. So in Chetty et al., the children are examined getting close up to midlife, so looking at ages 36, around 35, 36. We're going to be looking at children around the ages of 25 and 26 to capture the changes in the EITC that occurred in the early 90s. So it's a little bit different in that respect, but it's essentially the same underlying data, and it was built in a similar way. So our research questions then are as follows. Did greater generosity of EITC dollars in a policy sense lead to better child outcomes? The outcomes that we look at go beyond just the intergenerational mobility in terms of child's rank in the income distribution. We're going to be looking at the child's family income. We're going to be looking at the probability that a child filed as a single parent. And we're going to look at the transmission of EITC use between the generations. We're also going to ask whether changes in outcomes differed by whether the child was a boy or a girl, the marital status of the mothers in the family that the child grew up in, and also, of course, race. And we are going to focus on these policy changes to the EITC that rolled out between 1991 and 1996. We're going to pinpoint the year of the largest percentage change in generosity between the one-child credit and the two-child credit, which occurred in 1994. When we calculate lifetime potential EITC, we're just going to use the changes in the policy's generosity and family structure in order to get a child-specific calculation of their family's EITC dollar value that they were potentially eligible for. When we use the 1994 policy change, we're going to use that in sort of an event study framework to see the impact of the 1994 policy change at the age when it became applicable to the focal child. So if you have a sibling in 1994, that change occurred in 1994 for you. If you have a sibling that's born in 1998, then, and you were otherwise an only child, then that's when the policy will become applicable. So we're using both of those things, two different specifications, to look at the impact of EITC on these outcomes. And the data that we're going to be using, as I mentioned, is similar to that used in the two large-scale papers that came out in 2020 in the QJE and the working paper in 2019, which hopefully will be published soon, which is the data that underlie the Opportunity Atlas. If you have not looked at the Opportunity Atlas, I hope most everybody has, you should go look at it because it is really, really cool data at the tract level that gives information about children's outcomes based on the tract in the United States that they grew up in. And we have a whole bunch of different outcomes that we look at, including children's rank based on different cutoff points of parental rank, the probability of incarceration, the probability of single parenthood, all this wonderful stuff. So go look at that. You can just, Google Opportunity Atlas and you'll land on the page. The data that are involved in creating the Opportunity Atlas, and just to be clear, we're using the microdata that underlies the atlas ourselves, are decennial census data from 2000 to 2010, 2000 and 2010, including the long form and the short form from 2000. American Community Service survey data, which is all years of the ACS that are available. And these two data sets, and one that I don't mention here, the NUMIDENT, which is the list of all Social Security numbers and some date of birth information for anybody who ever got a social. That basically covers the US population. And we then have fairly rich demographic information that come from these surveys and censuses. And we can link using a unique identifier that's placed on all of these data sets to really any other information that we happen to hold, including income tax returns, which we use in this case from 1979 through 2017. These links occur both sort of in the cross-section and over time. So if you can link someone to their 1979 1040 and they also happen to file in 2017, we can get both years for that person. One thing to point out in the way that these data are built is that the intergenerational link occurs beginning in 1994. A law was put in place in the it kind of rolled out in the late 1980s that parents had to list their children's Social Security number on their tax forms for the first time, I think, beginning in 1985 for a certain age range. So we don't have really the full information about dependents and the dependents that go with the parents until 1994. Most of the children in our data are linked in 1994 to their parents. Some of them are, we find the link in later years, but essentially we can find 93% of all children from the population data claimed by a parent at some point in the 1040 data. So we have 93% of the population of children from these cohorts in the United States. That leads us to our target sample information, where we are looking at children who were born in the cohorts 1979 to 1991. And I will explain why we use those specific cohorts when I talk about sort of the setup of where information is collected for each group. Those are children who were born in the United States or who were authorized immigrants who came to the United States as children. And also different from the Chetty et al. Work is we're going to focus our sample on parents who are below the 35th parent percentile in the income distribution. We want to do this because while we don't want to impute EITC eligibility based on parental income, because that's endogenous, we do want to try to limit our analysis to parents who were likely eligible for the EITC at some point over the focal children's childhood. And so parental income is averaged between 1994 and 2000. Having parents who are in this range keeps sort of the average income for parents below the income threshold for EITC. So that was important that we not sort of contaminate our sample with people who were on average never going to be eligible for the EITC. We tag the first adult to claim the child as the invariant parent. This follows Chetty et al., who do the same thing. And we identify the family type for the child based on the marital status at that claiming. So we are going to be looking at specifically two subgroups: children who grew up in married families and children who grew up in single mother families. We recognize that there are also single father families. I'm not going to show results for them. They tend to look more like married families than they do like single mother families. Okay. No questions? Okay. This handy little graphic shows the cohorts that we choose, the years in which we get the children's income, and where we get the parents' income and where the intergenerational link might happen. Our focal children were born, as I said, between 1979 and 1991. If you look ahead 25 to 26 years, then we're getting children's income between 2005 and 2017. This is when children are between the ages of 25 and 26. You'll notice 2009 is another important year in EITC policy changes. And fortunately, our children are all 18 before that policy change happens. So it was kind of important to get our cohorts sandwiched between these two major policy events, the ones that happened 85 and in the early 90s, 86 in the early 90s, and then before this move to the 3-child credit, which was only going to hit a couple of people, a couple of cohorts, if we moved up to a higher cohort range. So this kind of neatly sandwiches people between those two policy events. 1994 is in red here for two reasons. One is that, again, that's the first time you can see a link to parents for these kids. And it's also the year of the biggest percentage increase in the difference between the first child, the one child credit and the two child credit, which we're going to be using as a treatment, a treatment indicator. It's also the first year of parents' income, which, as I mentioned, we're averaging between 1994 and 2000. Our sibling pool comes from siblings who were born anytime between 1978 and 1999. So we do have information on siblings who are claimed by parents who are also parents to focal children in these years. So that expands the sibling pool quite a bit. And then the intergenerational link can really happen anytime between 1994 and 2017, anytime a parent claims a kid from this time period. Okay, so it's important to go through the EITC policy changes that underlie the treatment that we're looking at. I see that there are some things in the chat. I wonder if I can open that.
Yeah, I got it for you.
Yeah.
So first, Tim had said, thank you for coming. Tim's meeting. And then he said he was concerned about the first child claim as the invariant parent when we have low income kids and complex families who move around. Maybe comment on that at the end. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Yeah, yep.
It's a little bit of deciphering Tim's typing, but just concern about, I think, the first child claim being the time invariant parent when we know families are very fluid, particularly low-income families.
Yes, I completely agree with that statement. It's something that we have not yet had the opportunity to examine, and that's on the list. So I think we did get some pushback for the work that we did on the Chetty et al. Paper, because we made the same decision there, where we always treat the first parent to claim as the invariant parent. And I have looked a little bit at how much action there might be on the kind of like how often that might change, but it has not yet been incorporated into this work. So, and hopefully it will be at some point, and we can see what kind of problem that creates. But I agree that that's something that we need to do better. So thanks for that comment. So the EITC policy changes and the empirical strategy that we use has been used by a number of other people, where we are calculating lifetime EITC based on the schedule that you see below, and we're doing that independent of parent income. So the things that are going to determine how much you get in lifetime EITC are the cohort in which you were born, the number of siblings that you have, and the distance in age between you and your siblings. You know, how much time do you spend as an only child, essentially, or as a child in a two-child family. And so that varies quite a lot within our cohorts, and creates a considerable amount of variation, along with the variation that you do see year by year leading up to this big split in the one-child credit and two-child credit. And as I mentioned, the three-child credit is not going to apply to the cohorts that we look at. And as I mentioned, we're going to exploit this. I actually am able to use my little drawing thing here. We are actually able to exploit this change that happened right here. Oh, let me try that again. In 1994. So as I mentioned, that is the year when there was this really steep difference between the one-child credit and the two-child credit. And I think it's really important to point that out, because I think there has been some recent research on the EITC that treats the legislation that was passed that created that big bump up. But that big bump up didn't actually happen until the next year. So it's important to point out. Oops. Okay, so the changes in the federal EITC policy are exogenous and represent our intent to treat. When I say that they're exogenous, I mean, obviously federal policy happened outside of, family structure. As I mentioned before, there might be some concern for endogeneity of income. You could make the case that there could be some endogeneity questions regarding family structure that people might find that the EITC either induces or reduces fertility, that people want to have a second kid so that they can get the larger credit. It seems like there isn't really good evidence on this, and the evidence that that people have attempted to show has been contradictory. And you can imagine a story where people are being brought back into the labor force and the child might interrupt that. And so we are going to go with the idea that family structure, the choices that are made over family structure, are exogenous to the EITC policy changes. And then within a cohort, the policy is not going to vary, but the lifetime dollar value of the EITC is going to depend, as I mentioned, on this family structure. This leaves us with an issue that only children within a cohort are going to see no variation in lifetime dollar values. And they are basically going to sort of represent a base group in a lot of our specifications because of the control variables that we include. Sorry, my brother-in-law is in the other room and he's playing the Rolling Stones.
No worries.
Can you hear that?
No.
Oh, okay.
Or not well. Tell him to turn it up, maybe.
Good. Good background.
Just kidding. But it's not disruptive to your talking, so I think we're good.
Now. Okay, good. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so children with siblings within a cohort are going to have this variation depending on the number and age difference of siblings. And we're going to express lifetime EITC value in bins of $10,000. Basically, because if you look back at the, this is a really generous policy. You can see the credit values, 1 year credit values on the y-axis. And so over the lifetime, this is a really large number. And we're going to express the income variables in the same values, so in increments of 10,000 K. And then we're going to express the children's EITC dollars that they claim in later life in $100 increments. And that's just for ease of it, looking at the coefficients. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at these age at treatment effects when a child is within a cohort is first exposed to the two-child credit, which is going to vary depending on the birth of siblings. Here we're restricted to looking only at children who have siblings at some point. And we use 1994 as the treatment year. We continue in those specifications to control for lifetime dollar value. Because obviously if you're treated for the first time when you're 15 years old, you're not going to have very much dollar value added on compared to somebody who is treated at a very young age because of the nature of the aging out of kids for the credit. I do want to spend a little bit of time on talking about the definition of ranking that we do. We follow the standard set by Chetty Hendren and their various co-authors, where we take a kid's parents' income, we average that within the child's cohort over 1994 and 2000, and then we just line parents up. So they're ranked by income just in order, and then the rank is expressed in percentiles. The child is ranked similarly within year and cohort, and we grab the kid's rank at age 25 and 26, and we're showing results for the average rank between those ages. And this ranking provides for an easy to interpret linear relationship between child and parent income that's become fairly standard in the literature. It has its pluses and minuses, but we're going to follow basically the same type of analysis here. So this is from Chetty et al. 2020 QJE paper showing how this ranking plays out between white and black children when it's traced out in this linear fashion. So it creates this nice sort of like linear relationship. And it also gives you a good idea of this rank difference between black and white children. And one of the outstanding questions in this analysis is, why does this gap exist? And what are the forces in the US economy that might close this gap or widen it? And we're proposing that the EITC might be one of those forces. And so I'm going to come back to a graph that looks very much like this later and talk about how the EITC might impact the nature of these lines. So essentially, if a parent has zero income, if you are a child who grew up in a black family, you're going to see at the intercept an income rank that is a little bit more than 20%. And then correspondingly, if you grew up in a white family, you're going to see, and with zero, you're going to see this intercept be closer to the upper 30s. And the point of this graph is to show that while the intercepts differ, the slope is between the two groups is the same. So as parent household income rank increases, children's mean household income rank also increases up the line. So that brings us to the main estimating equation, which is simply an extension of the type of econometric specification from Chetty et al., where we're adding lifetime EITC to the equation, but we're still controlling for the parent's rank in the income distribution. And one of the child outcomes that we look at is the child's rank in their own income distribution. Other outcomes that we're going to look at, as I mentioned, are the income rank, either for the child's family or at the individual level. So for the children, we actually also have W-2 data that we can add into the mix, and we can look at their individual income from their aggregated W-2s. And we can also, through the W-2s and also some of the supplemental forms with the 1040 filing, look at the probability that the child works. From the 1040, we can see whether the child filed as a single parent. And we can also see whether the child claimed EITC. We have two variables. One is the earnings that the kid said that they had for EITC purposes, and the number of children that they claimed for EITC, which then makes the actual EITC dollar value a pretty quick calculation. So our key variables are parent rank. In all of our specifications, we're going to control for everything is going to be conditional on the parent's rank in the income distribution, and of course this lifetime EITC variable. The things that we include in this model are a bunch of child-specific and family-specific indicator variables, including birth order, gender, whether they grew up in a single mother family type, race fixed effects, indicators for the total number of siblings. And we include this quadratic in the difference in age to closest sibling, where the base difference is in absolute value. If we actually use like directions, we probably couldn't also do order. And then we include, this isn't on the list here, but we include the parents' cohort year, so basically the age of the parent. And then a whole bunch of state variables, including the state fixed effect, minimum wages, state EITCs, and some AFDC and TANF controls like time limits and that sort of thing. And all of the state information is based on the year that the child was first claimed. One of the specifications that we ran was to change this to some of the state information being at the time that the child is measured, like at their age 25 to 26, and it didn't really make any difference. So, so we kept it to the information from when the child was claimed. And then, as I mentioned, family type is going to be assigned based on this initial claim by the parent. And as I mentioned, and as Tim pointed out, that's something that we should spend some time assessing. Okay, so this is what we see based on that specification. I'm going to get my little drawing tool again. The first thing that I want to point out is this parent income rank. That is pretty much spot on from the Chetty et al. Estimate. So even though because everything is linear, even though we've restricted the sample to be below the 35th percentile of the parental income distribution, we're still getting that same slope relationship here. And then the added value of the childhood EITC states that for $10,000 more in childhood EITC, you are 0.3 percentage points higher in the child income rank distribution. So that's modest, really quite modest. If we look at the next row, we see that childhood eligible EITC is associated with $240 more in family income. And that, I would say, if you compare it to some of the recent work done with the Moving to Opportunity project, the back of the envelope calculations for that project indicate something on the order of $1,000 to $2,000 more per year in family income for children who are impacted by the MTO. So this is, an order of magnitude less than that. And so, like I say, it's pretty modest. What we do find, and I'm going to go ahead and draw this around what I think is important, is that if you look at all here, it's going to be filled up with people who tend to be parents who tend to be lower income, which includes single mothers. So single mothers make up a fairly large proportion of all. If you compare the impacts by whether or not you grew up in a single mother household or a married household, you see that married households have an impact that is more than twice as large as the impact seen for single mothers. Those who grew up in single mother households. And we think this is really sort of the important takeaway from the work is, again, this idea that the move from out of work to in-work benefits might have actually, to an extent, subsidized two-earner households to have the mother stay at home and maybe invest more in kids. And when I say mother, I should say the lower earning parent to stay home and invest in children that might have led to slightly better outcomes for married children vis-a-vis the EITC, married family, children who grew up in married families compared to those who grew up in single parent households.
And Maggie, I know you mentioned this, but I just want to interrupt and ask quickly.
Yeah.
When you're saying EITC over childhood, is that which years of coverage for? Is it 0 to 18?
Yes. Yeah, it's 0 to 18. Yeah, I should have said that.
You may have, and I may have not paid.
No, I don't think I did. The EITC is actually available to people who are students up to the age of 24. And unfortunately, I mean, again, I think we can do this. I'll mention towards the end that we're hoping to extend this work by adding in some variables from the American Community Survey. And so we might be able to sort of tease out which kids might have remained eligible based on their educational attainment. But for right now, we don't really have any information on that. And so we cut off everybody at 18.
But if you're counting 0 to 18, but do you know if their parents were getting it when they were, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So the story about, I'm just saying, the story about enabling a parent to stay home when the child is young is an age-specific story. So I was just wondering if there's any way to dig deeper there.
Yeah, we could probably when we get to the age at treatment impacts, which I'm going to get to in a couple of slides, that might answer some of your questions.
I think so.
And so I think you're on the right track there. This is, of course, all kids. Like in the later specification, it's going to be kids who have siblings. So this includes only children in this set of results. But I think we'll be able to tease that out. And when we get there, maybe you can ask again and see if I answered it. Yes, and so this difference between children who grew up with single mothers and those who grew up with married mothers seems pretty stark. Essentially, the married results are more positive by double what the coefficient estimates are for single mothers. One of the things as we go through that you're going to find is that married versus single seems to matter more than Black versus white, but we do find some differences within the single mother group between white children and Black children. So race is assigned based on the child, but we're kind of assuming that the mother who raises the child is likely to be the same race. So children who grew up in single mother white households really don't show any response to an additional $10,000 of EITC compared with Black children who grew up in single mother Black households. And that's true down the line for all of these, with the exception of whether or not they work. So it seems like the effect is more or less the same between those two groups. But we also found that to be interesting, and we don't really have a terrific explanation for it. Okay, so some of the other outcomes we looked at were single parenthood and the EITC dollars that the child claimed in their tax filing, and the probability that they claimed EITC. And again, the differences really play out between single children who grew up in single mother households and those who grew up in married households, where the ones who grew up in single mother households show a much higher likelihood of filing as a single parent, higher EITC dollar claims, not huge, 18 bucks, and then higher probability, again, economically extremely small, on the probability of claiming EITC as an adult. And you see that this difference between those who grew up in single mother households versus married households is really driven by the activity in the white group. So, $41 more in EITC claimed, and a 0.1 percentage point increase in the probability of claiming. Okay. That leads us back to sort of the graph that I showed earlier, and kind of the point of this, and that is how did these impacts play out over the parental income rank distribution compared with the child rank distribution. And so that's what this graph attempts to get to. The way that we did this was we took percentile cutoffs in the parent rank distribution, so between like 0 and 5%, and we ran our specification within those bins, and then we predicted values for child rank based on those estimations, and then we just graphed out the estimations in the dotted lines that you see here. So this is the main specification, just straight up as the data are. And then we basically set our EITC dollar value to 0. And we predicted new values based on $0 values of lifetime EITC for everyone. And we looked at how the relationship between parent rank and child rank played out over the parent distribution. And those are the solid lines. And what you see here is that between about the 10th percentile and 25th percentile, children who grew up in Black families, this is all families, by the way, this is not like single or married, children who grew up in Black families really showed the most action in terms of how much impact EITC had on closing the gap between the Black and white mobility relationship. And then when you get up to the 25th to the 35th percentile, you see that it's really the white group that shows a real bump in rank improvement due to the EITC. And this is a little concerning to us because if you think about it, the implication of this is that relatively more affluent white children are receiving a benefit from the EITC at this higher level of the parental income distribution. And it seems like that will be likely to just exacerbate within generation income inequality over time. And so I think it goes back to the composition of married versus single families within these groups, within the parental distribution. I don't have the exact numbers up anywhere in the presentation, but Black families are far more likely in the lower ends of the parental rank distribution to be single mothers. I think it's this composition effect and the results that we saw by married versus single that are sort of leading to the relationship that we see here. So that's kind of unfortunate. And I think it goes back again to assessing these policies based on sort of what they mean for families as opposed to individual labor force participation or individual income trajectories. That brings me to this second specification that we ran. Just to refresh your memory, this is your age vis-a-vis 1994 and the family structure that might lead to you being treated to the more generous two-child credit at later ages or earlier ages. I should note that we can only look at an age effect between the age of 3 and the age of 15 because of the years of the cohort years of data that we use. So because of 1991, the threshold value for your getting treated, the earliest age you could possibly be treated is 3. So that's why we have the age of 3 as the starting point. We are going to use age 10 as our base group and compare everything in relation to the age of 10. And these are simply our equations restricted to kids who have siblings, and using this age of treatment as a fixed effect. So it's the age you were treated to the two-child credit, thrown into the regression as a fixed effect, and these are the coefficient estimates. And as you can see, for all children, and here we're looking at the average child income rank between the ages of 25 and 26, that's the coefficient value here, compared to age 10. Children who are first treated to the two-child credit at younger ages actually show for single children the possibility that they are negatively impacted in terms of their income rank up to about the age of 9. We see that married children have a line that is below the 0 line as well, but the confidence intervals are showing that it's not really statistically significant except possibly the age of 4. The confidence intervals overlap pretty strongly between single and married, so we can't rule out that the effects are the same between single and married children. Children who grew up in single versus married households. Sorry, I keep on saying that incorrectly. However, compared to age 10, when you look at older ages, we find that children who are treated after the age of approximately 11 show strong increases in income rank that are especially strong for children who grew up in married families, and a little bit less strong for children who grew up in single mother families. So it seems like the action is really taking place for children who are in early adolescence to late adolescence. This is actually consistent with what was found in Bastian and Mitchell-Moore. They found that children after the age of 12 who were, they do a slightly different specification where they're grouping people by the impact of EITC based on cohort, because they go back to earlier cohorts. But they still find that it's increased generosity at those ages that really makes a big difference in children's outcomes. So hopefully that that answers the question that we had before about how do you know the impact by
age. 2 questions. So first, Lois Miller, one of our great GRFs, asks, what's the magnitude and sign of the coefficient at 10 since it's normalized to 0?
We did produce that.
So less than, and implicitly, I think she's saying less than 10 is not like, right, a coefficient that means it's a benefit less than the age 10 benefit doesn't mean a 0 benefit, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's right. So we chose 10. We specifically chose 10 because that seemed to be where the least amount of action was happening. But I don't know specifically the value of the coefficient. I don't believe it was statistically significant. So stating what the value was might not be terribly useful. But yeah, you're right that everything is in relation to the age of 10. The age 10 coefficient was, and actually around that, like age 9, for all of these graphs was closer to the 0 than the other ones, which is why we chose it as the base group.
And also, just to clarify for my own knowledge, so the children who received it at age 3, 4, 5, or if their parents received it at age 4, 5, they would have been eligible to receive it through all of childhood, right? So
not necessarily, no.
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, these age at treatment dummy specifications,
yeah,
are all conditional on lifetime EITC. So you could have a sibling you could be 3 years old and have a sibling who's 17,
Okay.
and you're treated at 3, but you're only treated for that
For
1
year.
year.
Okay, but probabilistically, on average, it's more of a treatment for younger children than older children? No? Do you know?
Yes, I think it is, but it's not necessarily, it's because of the aging out. So,
yeah.
So probabilistically it is simply because if you are, like I mentioned, if you're treated at age 14, you only have 4 years to receive benefit. But that's exactly why we control for lifetime EITC in here. So, because you still would have received the EITC as the only child.
Yeah.
But your 2-child credit is going to be necessarily curtailed if you get it later in life.
Yeah. And then another question from one of our attendees. If the EITC increases educational attainment, are there concerns about observing child outcomes relatively early at ages 25 and 26?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, as somebody who went back to get their PhD pretty late in life, treating age 25 is like, that's the end of your educational experience is not often the case, not always the case. And so I would agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why we do want to bring in the ACS data and look at education as sort of a mechanism by which we see some of these patterns. So for instance, if you are not working, and we see that you're not working at age 25, is it because you're really not working, or is it because you're enrolled, right? So we can tease out those things a little bit better if we can look at the ACS data for people to look at their educational attainment and try to get an idea of year of degree and that kind of thing.
Great.
I'm not keeping very close tabs on the time.
We have about 15 more minutes.
Oh gosh, okay, I better get moving.
And folks better keep asking questions if they have them, so we may not have a lot of time at the end for questions. So.
Okay, yeah. Just wanted to point out that this pattern is similar when we look at just child family income. And less action is seen in whether the child works. Although we do see that compared to age 10, children who are treated in single mother households are less likely to show a probability of working, and then they pick up steam again compared to age 10 at around age 14. And we don't really see, we see better results for children in married households compared to age 10 for children who are treated at younger ages. So this was an interesting difference in terms of like who you might expect, if this goes back to the schooling question, who you might expect to be in school, or sort of the relationship between these two different family types and the probability of work. So, okay. Here we look at the probability that a child is a single parent at ages 25 to 26 using the same specification. And again, the confidence intervals really sort of overlap here. So the story is not entirely clear, but it does seem as though for both groups, there's a slight indication that compared to age 10, if you're treated at a younger age, your probability of being a single single parent at ages 25 and 26 is very slightly increased. But most of you can't really say that there's a difference between single and married, people who grew up in single households and married households. And it's also not different from 0, except possibly at the age of 4. So finally, I think this is finally, yeah. So finally, we did again go back to this question of white families versus Black families. And the point of these graphs here is that there is more difference between family types than there are by family race. So the panel on the left shows results for single mothers, and we're comparing children who grew up in families who are Black and families who are white. And I have made sure that the axes of the two graphs are the same so that you could see the difference by married families and single mothers. And you see that the lines that are sort of traced out by the race groups really look more similar within the graph than they do in comparing the one graph to the other. The confidence intervals for the folks who grew up in Black families, for Black married families, are quite wide. I think because there's just fewer people in that group. I think that this is a story that we see fairly consistently for every one of these outcomes, is that there's more difference between married and single families than there are between white and Black families.
And Maggie, does the, again, with marriage being a dynamic thing, does who is in each group change as children age, or are you assigned into a married or single group based on a point in time?
You're assigned into a married or single group based on a point of time and when you're claimed. And like we've talked about, that's something that I am working on a different project to assess the impacts of family changes as a general thing on children's outcomes. And hopefully we'll be able to incorporate some of that analysis into this work as well.
Thanks.
So I guess I can sum up here or create some discussion. We find that greater EITC generosity over a child's childhood generally improves outcomes for children. So it seems like as a policy, the more EITC you get based on family structure, the better off you tend to be. However, improved outcomes seem much stronger for children who grew up in married families compared to children who grew up in single parent families, single mother families specifically. And so this does open up some equity questions about how we want to see these monies flow and what kind of impacts that they have based on family type. We see an improvement in the child's rank in the child-specific income distribution, the child's family income, and in labor force participation. And we find a slight suggestion that single parenthood and EITC claiming is transmitted in white families, but not in Black families. So for children growing up in single mother white households, they tended to show higher EITC participation in adulthood and also higher rates of single parenthood. And we think most of what we find in a global sense between white and Black children in overall income mobility across the parental income distribution are due to compositional effects. So the concentration of single parenthood in Black families, which may account for differences in where families see the impact in the change in income distribution induced by the EITC. And our results suggest that the EITC might actually exacerbate racial income inequality in the second generation by further improving already relatively better off white children in in the parental income distribution. Okay, so as I mentioned, planned extensions are to link the ACS and decennial long-form variables so that we can examine some mechanisms such as educational attainment to see how some intermediate effects might be impacting these results that we find at ages 25 and 26. We want to ponder whether the EITC acts as a housing subsidy. So I'm really kind of interested in this. We have location information for all of these families. It's one of the key bits of information that we added to the Opportunity Atlas. And so we can actually see whether families use the EITC as a housing subsidy to improve the neighborhood that they move to, which might also be sort of an intermediate impact. If neighborhoods have a separate impact on children's outcomes, then the possibility that the EITC allows families to move might lead to further improvement in children's outcomes. And then we'd like to produce some output for further race and ethnic groups. The fact that we don't really look at people of Hispanic origin, I think would be a good addition. Also, American Indian, Alaska Native folks, and then we're interested in hearing from you guys on what other steps we should take to improve our work. This is, I think this might be the third time I presented this, so this is still fairly new, and we're looking for ways to improve it. And that's it.
Thank you. So we'll open it up for questions. I have one quick point of clarification and then one waiting question. So the whites were non-Hispanic whites, then I take it. Okay.
Yep.
Useful to know. And a more substantive question, someone asked, she said, I can't remember back to the empirical specification, but I don't think EITC is interacted with parent income rank. I'm thinking the policy could be related to lower persistence of parent income rank, but maybe not. Could you clarify?
So one of the things that we looked at, I think that's a good point. One of the things that we looked at was whether the EITC was related to changes in parents' income rank. So we attached the child's information to the parents. So now the parents are the ones being treated by the EITC. And we made the data basically into like a difference in differences study instead of this sort of, this more sort of event study kind of thing. And we did not see any year by year impact of additional EITC generosity or like higher rates of EITC based on family structure on whether or not the parents changed their income rank or their income value. Depending on how we measured it, because we have, the data are enormous, and so we got very, very small statistically significant effects that, depending on the specification, were either positive or negative. So they were zero, right? So, I mean, economically zero. So we didn't really see that the EITC as a policy changed the parents' labor force behavior overall. And this, you might think that this is a problem because one of our sort of stated results is that married families might have gotten more benefit out of the EITC because it subsidized parents to stay at home. But you have to remember that the EITC's impact is mainly on the extensive margin, right? And so, and not the intensive margin. And so, and we're going to see people who are taxpayers within that group who are already working, essentially, and already paying taxes and already sort of part of the system. We're not seeing that intensive margin change that leads to changes in rank for the parents.
So Maggie, just a quick follow-up question from one of our listeners. Could you talk a little bit more about the labor response of parents in the two-parent households? So and I think you just answered this, but maybe putting it in more direct terms. Do you see that there's a trend for mothers or parents for one to be working and one not in these families? Is there any way that you can look into that or test that?
No, there's no way we can look into that or test it. We can look, we might be able to look at single mothers and get an idea of work or not work, but for married families, we can't really make that distinction because AGI is a tax unit concept. So we can't separate that out by parents. And then even with the single moms, with the fact that we're looking only at people who file a 1040, it is a selective sample of people. Like it's people who are working and filing. So yeah, I can't think of a way to look at labor force entry for that group.
Okay. Lois Miller says she knows that you only observe EITC eligibility in this setup, but do you have a sense of take-up, either overall or within race family structure groups?
Yeah, I do. So we, for whatever nutty reason, got the EITC on 1 year of data. And that was it was 2 years of data. It was 79 and 84. And of course, this is before we had any kids that we could link to the parents. And my prior was that EITC was not as well known, it wasn't as generous, and that take-up was going to be really low. And that wasn't what we found. We found that take-up rates were actually close to modern take-up rates, like take-up rates that you would see today. So even in the fairly early years of the program, people were taking it up at, I can't give you an exact number because I haven't gotten it DOB'd, but it was between 70 and 80%. So take-up of the EITC, it looks like, has always been pretty high. I mean, especially compared to another program like food stamps or some of the other comparison programs that you could make, where take-up rates are more in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and I think implicitly is a question of whether that might explain differences across race or family structure groups. So do we know that they're similar across?
Yeah, I would have to look more closely at that, but that's a really good point to look at it separated by race. And I only looked at it overall. I didn't really look it out. This was very early in this project, and we can look at that, and it would be a good addition.
Then I'm going to provide one quick comment from Kurt Paulson before I unmute Tim's meeting. So Tim, get ready. So Kurt, who is a housing scholar, suggests a testable hypothesis regarding the ability to use EITC as a housing subsidy a la MTO. This ability will be conditional on race and family structure. Even with the same income net of EITC, Black female-headed households will experience fewer housing opportunities and more discrimination in housing.
That's very true. Yeah. That's a good suggestion.
Point. All right, Tim, I'm going to unmute you.
I can't.
He has not. Come on, Tim.
He might need to unmute his device.
I'm unmuting. Okay.
Okay, great. We hear you loud and clear.
So I'm so happy that you're doing this stuff on moving. Way back when we did the first study in Chicago in 1990, when we actually asked 1,500 families what they would do with the refunds, about 5% of them said, well, I've got the first and last, the lump sum nature gives me the first and last month's rent, so I can move. Another thing is transportation and jobs is another one. And another thing that they were doing was paying tuition to parochial schools to get their kids into better schools even where they are. So I'll send you this paper I did with Catherine Ross and O'Connor. It's in an NTJ.
Oh, I've read it.
But I'm thinking that there's all sorts of these things that you could see a little glimpse of when we actually talk to people that you can now
definitely
actually can figure out. So Thanks again for your great work. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Okay, and with that, we're actually, we're at time. So Maggie, I want to thank you. That was a great presentation and very, very interesting.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing how it progresses, and really appreciate your time sharing it with us today.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.